led to the soft tissue loss along the ulnar aspect of his finger.
Okay. Now, did you observe the testimony of Dr. Richard Moore?
Yes, I did.
And he testified about Mr. Depp's finger injury as well?
Correct.
Right. Did you agree with Dr. Moore's testimony?
Certain parts of his testimony I did, yes, okay, but not all of it.
Focusing on the parts that you, well, first of all, why don't you tell us what you agree on?
Well, I agreed in terms of his interpretation of the x-rays, saying that he had a comminuted fracture and this was some type of high-force injury.
Okay. What did you disagree with?
Well, I disagreed with several things that he said. He first said that he does not believe that the mechanism of injury could be, as described by Mr. Depp, holding the hand on the side of a marble bar, because he said it was all a palmar injury, and there was a palmar component to the injury. I'm talking about the soft tissue loss, but there was also a dorsal, meaning the back of the finger. So the soft tissue loss was actually, if you looked at the pictures which were shown when Dr. Moore testified, the injury goes like this. So it's an angled or an oblique type injury. And there's no way that anybody could determine whether or not it was a palmar directive force, meaning from the palm side, or a dorsally directive force. But certainly either are plausible.
Okay. Anything else come to mind that you disagreed with?
Well, he also described that this was definite. Well, he thought that this was a pinching, or what he described as an avulsion type injury, and that's referring to the soft tissue loss. That's certainly possible, but if you look at the pictures that were shown when he testified, the laceration looked fairly clean. There were clean edges. It was not jagged. And generally, when you have an avulsion or a pinch type injury, you see a very irregular border to the skin. It's pinched off, you can imagine, as opposed to something that's cleaner that would be lacerated by, let's just say, a piece of glass or a knife or whatever. And that's more consistent with the pictures of Mr. Depp's injury.
And we're using the term soft tissue loss, and just to make sure we're on the same page, can you just tell very quickly what you're referring to there?
Right, so there were two components to this injury. One, the fracture of the bone, and two, he had loss of the soft tissues so that the bone was exposed. So that amputated part that was found at the bar.
Now, you were saying that Dr. Moore testified that this was an avulsion, and meaning a pinching injury, right?
Correct.
Why do you believe it's more likely that it was a laceration?
Well, again, in general, a pinch-type injury results in, one, much more damage to the remaining tissue, but the remaining tissue is usually very irregular. The borders are jagged, and that's not what was depicted in the pictures.
Dr. Moore also testified that he thought a vodka bottle might not have sufficient force to cause the injury here. Is that your understanding of his testimony?
Correct.
What's your response to that?
I certainly believe that a vodka bottle that was thrown from a distance against a hand that was resting on a marble bar is more than sufficient force to result in this fracture and soft tissue loss.
Now, in looking at the medical records and the pictures of Mr. Depp's hand, what was the condition of his nail?
There was no injury to the nail.
And other than what you've already told us, how does that factor into your analysis, if at all, the fact that there was no injury to the nail?
Well, it makes it highly unlikely that the mechanism of injury described by Ms. Heard resulted in this injury, because you really would always see an injury to the nail and or nail bed.
Do you have any opinion regarding the direction of the injury?
Well, it's certainly based upon the soft tissue loss. It's an angled injury, or what we call medically an oblique injury, because the soft tissue loss is at an angle. He lost some of the tissue on the back of the finger as well as the palm side, primarily along the palm side. But other than that, you can't make any assumptions. Unless you saw a videotape of this injury, nobody could tell you definitively what the direction of the injury was.
Dr. Moore also commented on the absence of fragments of broken glass in Mr. Depp's injury. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
And how does the absence of glass fragments factor into your analysis?
It really doesn't. I've seen hundreds, if not probably at least 500 or more glass injuries, and I would say probably the majority you don't see glass in these injuries. It is much more common to see glass embedded in the wounds when you're talking about very fine glass. So if, just say, a wine glass would explode or something of that nature where you get little tiny shards. But in general, when you have thick glass, such as you see in a bottle or a pane of glass, you generally don't see, because they break into bigger pieces, and you generally don't see the glass. But you certainly can, but it's not surprising that you don't.
Can you definitively state how this injury occurred?
No, nobody can definitively state.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Gilbert.
Good morning.
Now, you're being paid $1,000 an hour for your work on this case, correct?
Correct.
And you agree, just to sum up how Mr. Moniz finished, you agree that the finger injury could have been caused by any number of things, right?
Yes.
And you're not offering an expert opinion on what you believe caused the finger injury, correct?
Correct.
And you're aware, you said a few times Ms. Heard's account or Ms. Heard's explanation, right? You remember saying that?
Yes.
You're actually aware that Amber has said she doesn't know how he lost his finger. You're aware of that, right?
Yes.
So when you were just talking about Ms. Heard's account or Ms. Heard's explanation, you're aware she's never actually given an explanation for how she thinks he lost his finger, correct?
No.
Yeah. You're aware that Ms. Heard testified, and this was from your deposition, you're aware that she testified she doesn't know how he got his fingertip chopped off. You're aware of that, right?
Asked and answered, Your Honor.
Overruled.
No, I'm not. I reviewed the records, and in one of the testimonies depositions that I reviewed, it was described that that potentially it was lost when he was punching against the wall with a phone.
And on that, the last point there, I think we agree. Ms. Heard's testified in this trial and previously that she saw him smash a phone to smithereens, a wall phone. You'd agree with that, correct?
Correct.
But she doesn't know if that was what caused him to lose his finger. You agree with that, correct?
I agree. I cannot speak for her, but yes.
Okay. May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Dr. Gilbert, you gave a deposition in this case on March 17th, correct?
Correct.
You were under oath in that deposition. You swore to
Correct.
tell the truth, correct?
Correct.
Okay, if you could turn to page 61, please. You see there are four pages per page of paper. It's on page 16 of the document.
Okay.
Okay, in line 9, you're asked a question, and then Amber's response to that question, that's the line 9. Can you read that, please? Answer, I do not know. I did not see his finger go off. Question, and Dr. Gilbert, are you aware that Amber did not see Mr. Depp's finger go off? Answer, I mean, I'm aware that, well, I am from reading this. I'm aware of the mechanism that she claimed would cause the finger injury. Question, but have you read anything so far that indicates she doesn't know how the finger injury happened? Answer, so far from what I'm reading here, yes. Did I read that right?
Yes.
And you've heard no testimony in this trial from Ms. Hurd that the finger injury was definitively caused by the phone, so that she doesn't know, correct?
Correct.
And you'd agree that the fingernail was uninjured. You said that, right?
Correct.
And the nail bed was uninjured.
Correct.
Correct. But the area under the fingernail, in the pulp of the finger, that's where the injury took place, right?
It was not isolated to the pulp, no.
But it didn't injure the fingernail. That's my question.
Correct, yes.
And under Mr. Depp's alleged theory, Amber threw a vodka bottle at him from 10 feet away or so, right?
Correct.
And you testified you have no way to determine the angle that the bottle was coming from.
Correct.
Right? But she threw it on a downward trajectory, correct? She didn't. There's no allegation, you've never read anything, that she somehow underhanded it so it came up to his finger, right?
Correct.
And there's no way to tell, as you testified, what exact direction it came from, right?
Correct.
And the glass exploded, but you've already testified there was no glass in the wound, right?
Correct.
You haven't read any record of that in any medical records, correct?
Correct.
You also haven't read anything about there being cuts on the rest of his hand, right?
Correct.
And there was no glass found anywhere on the rest of his hand, correct?
Correct.
No bruising or injury on any other part of his hand other than the tip of his middle finger.
Correct.
And somehow, under Mr. Depp's theory, that bottle hit the bar and his fingers, but didn't damage the fingernail while it amputated the area under the nail. Correct?
Correct.
And your explanation of that is that you believe that his hand must have moved at some point during the force of the injury. Isn't that correct?
No, I said it could have, but I did not say that it did.
No, you believe that it did, don't you?
I said that it likely did, but I was not there, and I don't have videotape of the injury, so I can't determine that definitively.
Okay. Well, let's turn to page 25 of your deposition, please, on page 7.
Sorry,
Page 25 and 26, so it's page 7 of the document.
Okay.
Sorry if I was unclear on that.
No problem. I'm there.
Okay. Line 18, question, and to be clear, by, quote, sitting in that position, you mean hand down, palmar side down. Answer, that's what he claimed. I mean, according to the history, yes. Question, and would it matter if Mr. Depp's hand was palmar side down? Answer, not really, because it really, and I discussed this, it really just depends upon the angle at which the injury occurred, and as well, you can't determine if his hand had moved at some point during the force of the injury, which I believe it probably did, which I didn't get into in my note here, but question, and why do you believe that? Have you read anything in any of the materials to suggest that? Answer, no. Just that if it completely hit on the back of the finger, then he would have had a nail bed injury, which he did not. Did I read that right?
Correct.
That was testimony you gave under oath a month or two ago, right?
Correct.
So even though you have never read anything that suggests Mr. Depp's hand moved, his hand moving is the only way that you can fit your testimony into what Mr. Depp wants you to testify to about how the injury occurred, isn't it?
No, that's incorrect.
Okay, that's what you testified to, that if his hand hadn't moved, that there would be a nail bed injury, correct?
That is incorrect. That's not what I testified. That's
In fact, Dr. Gilbert, there's another explanation for how Mr. Depp somehow suffered an injury that didn't injure his nail one bit, but injured underneath the nail. And that explanation is that it didn't happen how Mr. Depp says it did, correct?
I cannot make that assumption, nor can you.
No further questions. Thank you.
All right, redirect.
Dr. Gilbert, just very briefly, the absence of other cuts on Mr. Depp's hand, how do you factor that into your analysis?
You certainly can see an isolated finger injury with any type of injury, and I would say any other host of mechanisms of injuries, you'd more likely see other, so again, if you're, I'm just using this as an example, if you're punching against a wall, you would more likely see multiple injuries to multiple fingers. It really just depends upon how the bottle, or how the mechanism of the injury impacted the hand at that point in time.
Ms. Hurd's counsel made a point of emphasizing that there were no bruises or other injuries on the hand, right?
Correct.
And how does that fact affect your analysis, if at all?
Well, it doesn't discount anything, but it certainly makes other potential causes of injury more unlikely, meaning punching against a wall or getting the hand slammed in a door or something like that.
And your discussion of Ms. Hurd's explanation of the alternative cause of the injury, was that based on anything other than Ms. Hurd's statements?
No.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Doctor, you can have a seat in the courtroom or you're free to go.
Thank you.